Franz Minar prepares contents for and post videos, video clips and shows on current affairs, government and governance on his YouTube channel. Topics deal with South African and global politics, economy, society, government, municipalities, and the relationship between government, business, society, and the corporate fraternity. My website offers the contents prepared for use in the videos to subscribers. This include datasheets, blog posts, reports, documents, video clips, and resources such as practitioner templates and presentations.
There can be no doubt that South Africa has been poorly governed over the last 2 decades. Even the most optimistic observer, passionate about the country's government, will not deny the stagnation in economic growth, the poor educational outcomes, the poor quality of public health, rampant corruption, tenderpreneurship, and the pandemic crime wave sweeping the country. In terms of policy outcomes or results, South Africa has not been doing well. Let's consider a few key economic indicators. The South African economy in 2023, in terms of real United States dollar values, produced less value, gross domestic product, than in 2013. In terms of purchasing power parity, a measure of the price of specific goods in different countries, used to compare the absolute purchasing power of the country's currencies, the economy has increased by $226 billion, or 32.76%, over a 10-year period. Over this same period, the real GDP per capita decreased by $250 per annum, that is, the amount in US dollars available for each citizen in the country. This was a reduction of 3.99%. The results achieved through a combination of policy and the bureaucratic effectiveness with which it is implemented is vitally important in determining the success or failure of government. Tangible results are what matter to people. However, there is more to government than that. What also matter to the population are the method whereby governments are elected and constituted, including the freedoms allowed to citizens and social actors, and the efficiency with which the collective governing system is operating. In this regard, South Africa can be described as a constitutional, democratic state. Essential freedoms, such as civil rights and freedom of expression, are constitutionally protected and generally respected by government, but also under increased pressure, as centralized power concentrations and the use thereof in pursuit of what is labeled the developmental transformative state increasingly clash with the requirements to maintain an open society. All of these elements operate in a corrupt and highly ineffective system, which is the reason for the poor outcomes of the policy and governance processes. In theory at least, the model of centralized top-down government applied in South Africa is highly dependent on implementation by a very efficient professional bureaucracy. Even then, where these conditions exist, such as in the Nordic countries, the ideological paradigms thereof have been proven as impractical and unworkable, and has been dropped, in spite of the availability of extremely effective and efficient supporting bureaucracies. In South Africa, the bureaucracy is inefficient and ineffective, and the impractical policy agenda is further worsened by inaccurate, ideologically driven assumptions about ideology, race, and development. Since 1994, South African politics and the exercising of state power has been dominated by the ANC. In my view, it will take the breaking of this grip to salvage the country's fate. But when I refer to domination by the ANC and the breaking of its grip, I meant it in a holistic sense, including its offsprings, such as the EFF, MK Party, and others that are even worse. I am actually talking about an ideological replacement. In the May 2024 general elections, for the first time in 30 years, the African National Congress did not achieve an outright majority of 50% plus 1 of the vote. This enforced an arrangement of power sharing that will enable the country's government to pass bills in Parliament, appropriate money, and continue the administration of South Africa. The result was the Government of National Unity. However, and this is the important point, I am not so sure that it implied the breaking of the ideological grip of the ANC. The GNU includes 10 political parties, but it is especially the apparent partnership between the ANC and the Democratic Alliance that has had the media, and the emotions, vivid. The GNU has been enthusiastically embraced by the business community and mainstream media inside South Africa and in most of the Western world. The question is whether this optimism is based in fact or fiction. In this production, I analyze this question and give my opinion about the GNU, supported by analysis of what I believe to be relevant data. I am convinced that what the ANC had in mind, following the results of the 2024 elections, was to establish a mechanism where all parties that wish could participate, but also where the ultimate power will remain in ANC hands.
President Cyril Ramaphosa said his African National Congress party will form a government of national unity. While the ANC won the election, getting 40% of the vote, it lost its parliamentary majority. Ramaphosa has invited all parties to join the government.
We have engaged, like we said, with a number of political parties, and we have reached a breakthrough on the common agreement that we need to work together.
The ANC never intended their version of the GNU to be a coalition between itself and the DA. The persistence that it was actually a coalition between the two main parties in the agreement, from various corners, including mainstream media in South Africa, goes against everything the party, that is the ANC, has said and done since the GNU arrangement was announced. There is just nothing, literally nothing, in what representatives of the ANC have said or done since the inception of the GNU that support the coalition theory. Following the results of the 2024 general elections, the ANC found itself in a conundrum. They had to find a way to govern the country, which required a parliamentary majority, not least of all, because they had to maintain the extensive patronage networks that are the backbone of the ANC's grip on power. They had received only 40% of the popular votes. In terms of South Africa's proportional representation system, this implies that they have received an equal number of seats in the National Assembly. The party on its own did there not have enough votes to pass budget or implement its legislative agenda.
The GNU is not a melting pot. As much as we have established mechanisms, there are points in which we may not agree at all, and therefore it does not replace the right of a political party to challenge the issues. The statement of intent does not say the ANC will suspend its policies. That must be understood. The statement of intent does not say the DA will suspend its policies and that will negotiate the melting of policies in the GNU. There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. We will not back down on BE, triple BE, and then our agenda of transforming this country as the largest party in the GNU. So, like I've said, let me repeat myself again and again, and I've said it even today, GNU is not a melting pot. It's not a melting pot. We coexist.
There are no signs or evidence that the ANC goes out of its way to consult the DA about important policies issues. They have always said, and stick to it, that the DA can leave the GNU whenever they want to, and they act accordingly. This was evident from the way the Bela Act was handled, the NHI debate and South Africa's foreign policy. Ramaphosa consults, yes, but he consults broadly among GNU partners, and only up to a point. There has been no victories for the DA in the NGU, but many for the ANC. The ANC has treated and handled the DA with a type of contemptuous annoyance ever since the GNU's inception. Think about Ramaphosa's letter to the DA during the GNU negotiations. This is probably, at least partly, an unconscious way of distancing itself from the perception, eagerly stirred by revolutionary forces to its left, that it is in bed with the traditional enemy, which they regard as the extension of the apartheid system.
We need to make it very clear. If the DA want to leave the GNU, it's their call. They can leave tonight, they can leave tomorrow. Anytime they want to leave or they wish to leave, they can go.
Gwed Tash has delivered a stern warning to Helen Zille and the DA. If the DA wants to walk away, we will have a working GNU. The ANC national chairperson made it clear that the Government of National Unity, GNU, doesn't depend on the DA's participation. Speaking with JJ Tabany on ENCA's Power to Truth, Mantash stated that no political party, including the DA, can collapse the GNU. Instead, he suggested that if Zille's party leaves, it would simply open the door for the MK party and the EFF to join.
Central to my argument is that the ANC does not need the DA. Maybe to some extent, Ramaphosa need the DA, but the ANC in its entirety does not. Most of South Africa does not support the DA's policies, and never will. Well, not in the foreseeable future anyway. Neither do most of the voters support the ideological point of departure of the DA. The point is this. Ideologically, the ANC, compared to the DA, got the majority behind it. It is wrong to interpret the inclusion of the DA in the GNU as the ANC shifting right. In fact, if anything, the GNU has caused the ANC to shift to the left. Helen Zille started negotiating with the ANC about a possible coalition before the elections. John Steenhuisen, Helen Zille, and numerous other politicians in the DA have persistently told voters that they will never work with the ANC, even as late as on the eve of elections. After the elections, the DA, that is always quick to claim the moral high ground, then turn around and do exactly what they have always said they will never do. I honestly have a problem with that. It wasn't a matter of introspection, but simply political maneuvering. Polls were clear. Even the ANC know that they will not achieve a 50% majority. Both the ANC as well as the DA have clearly prepared for that scenario prior to the elections. But yet the DA persist with the illusion that they will not work with the ANC, most likely to prevent a 2019-style backlash and exodus to the Freedom Front Plus. I do understand the theoretical justification for the decision to participate in the GNU from the side of the DA. I'm not that ignorant or deliberate. The argument is one of the lesser of two evils to prevent the utter demise of South Africa.
What do you say to DA voters who may feel a little bit betrayed? Because in your campaign to rescue South Africa, particularly from the ANC government, but here you are in bed with them. And you're saying, look, what is the other option? But the other option is governing from the opposition benches again.
Well, you don't govern from the opposition benches. That's the problem.
Role there.
You can't make things happen from the opposition benches. And the truth is that our biggest election promise to the voters is that we would keep out what we then called the Doomsday Coalition, the anti-constitutionalists. We said, we promised you we will keep out the people who are set on destroying our constitution. Jacob Zuma campaigned against the constitution. He wanted to get rid of the power of judges and all of that sort of thing. Julius Malema was also campaigning against the constitution. So we said to our voters, we will keep out the Doomsday Coalition, ANC, EFF, MK.
The alternatives which were on offer, rather than the current rather gargantuan government of national unity of several parties, was either a minority government which would have brought massive instability to the country and its governance, or on the other hand, an extremist rejectionist alliance, which would have consisted of the ANC and perhaps the EFF and MK. And I think whatever the current travails and challenges are economically and socially, things might have been much worse if that had come to pass. So it's not a perfect situation, but I think it's the best of the options that were available.
If you can get a political party with the ability for clean, excellent governance into a coalition arrangement, where it can have real sway, it could theoretically contribute meaningfully to a better, more prosperous South Africa. However, the question must be whether the DA is that party, at any level. I doubt it. The DA's track record on governance excellence hardly extends outside the boundaries of the Western Cape. The party has no meaningful power or influence in the GNU. The DA's claim of governance excellence is limited to examples in the Western Cape. In spite of popular claims to the opposite, there are no substantiated proof that the coalition government led by the DA has made any noticeable positive difference in the Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality. Johannesburg is collapsing, a process that has simply continued during the period when the DA was the leading party in coalitions governing the city. The ANC is entirely corrupt. What does it say about the moral compass of the DA if one of their major objectives, as a member of the GNU, has become to protect Ramaphosa against a vote in Parliament to investigate Fala Fala? The DA traditionally crucified the ANC about a bloated cabinet. Now, apparently, now that they are part of cabinet, the size thereof is not an issue. However, there is another issue to be mentioned insofar as ethical good governance is concerned. It seems to me like DA deployees are all too often willing to engage in rather questionable practices where they govern themselves, similar to the ANC. All of that can be understood and forgiven if the DA could secure strategic policy advantages from it, in the medium to long term. But there's no evidence that the DA exercises any moderating influence on the ANC's most destructive policies. No important cabinet positions where the fate of the country are determined was allocated to the DA, except for education. And in education, the DA has suffered one of its worst ideological defeats with the full implementation of the Bella Act. Furthermore, I am not so sure that the DA's employee in the position of education minister wholeheartedly supports her party's resistance to Bella. None of the DA's nominated ministries have had a meaningful positive impact on development in South Africa. The much-published improved efficiencies in ministries now under control of DA ministers will have no meaningful impact of the country's developmental trajectory. It was always a matter of playing for the media. There are factions in all political parties, including the DA. Each and every time, without a single exception that I am aware of, the first reaction of non-white incumbents in the DA that had a conflict with the party's leadership was that the party is racist and anti-transformative. Musi Maimane, the former leader of the party, was clear about his strong beliefs in far-reaching affirmative action, employment equity, and black economic empowerment. Lindiwe Mazibuko left because of this reason. Athol Trollop left because Maimane has left. Phumzile Van Dam left the party because of this reason. Randall Williams made this claim. Many, many more examples can be cited. I believe that this issue refers to the elephant in the room as far as the DA is concerned. The DA is a pro-capitalist party. No quarrels in the party. A prosperous future for South Africa can only be assured when every South African child receives a quality education, and when all adults have sufficient skills for dignified employment. No quarrels in the party. A belief in the South African people. No quarrels in the party. Freedom and opportunity. No quarrels in the party. Fairness, as a general normative principle. No quarrels in the party. Integral to a fair society are the requirements that opportunity is plentiful and not concentrated in the hands of the few, that everyone has the means to make use of their opportunities, that the strong do not exploit the weak, that we are free from unfair discrimination, and that we remove the barriers erected by apartheid which are still felt today. No quarrels in the party. South Africa is a richly diverse society. Though our people come from different origins, worship in different ways, and have different cultures and customs, we are all unique individuals. Diversity is one of South Africa's greatest assets. No quarrels in the party. The government is accountable to the people. A system of social security to protect people from extreme poverty. The delivery of high-quality basic services. Excellent education and healthcare. A functional criminal justice system to keep people safe. A growing economy to enable people to access jobs, and measures to level the playing field of opportunities as quickly as possible for people who today are still at a disadvantage because of the injustices of the past. No quarrels in the party. We cannot undo the past, but as a nation we have a duty to redress any disadvantages caused by our past, so that all South Africans may make equal use of their opportunities. A lot of quarrels in the party, predominantly along racial lines. The question is, how? Does it actually include targets-based Black economic empowerment and employment equity? The DA will achieve nothing that will improve my interests or address my concerns in South Africa. At the top of my mind is affirmative action and race-based redress. I have never, not even once, heard any senior leader of the GNU objecting to the ANC's stance about transformation as ANC policy. The GNU with or without the DA, it doesn't matter. Makes no difference to me or my life. It will not improve anything, only cause a few months of delusional optimism. Then everything will collapse back into well-deserved pessimism and reality. Cyril Ramaphosa needs the DA, to some extent, to safeguard him against the wrath of his enemies. But the ANC, as an organization, does not. It wasn't the ANC that has entered into an agreement with the DA and Freedom Front. It was the Ramaphosa section in the ANC, dragging along the organization. But the resentment about it in the ANC is enormous, fueled by the aggressive response from ANC partners against it, including the SACP and COSATU. However, Ramaphosa's role in this matter must be contextualized. He has multiple and powerful enemies inside and outside the ANC, including Jacob Zuma, who apparently hate him with a passion. He simply cannot afford a situation where these antagonists are placed in a position to challenge him, especially because they still have huge support in the ANC. Ramaphosa is associated with the more moderate side of the ANC. He is openly a huge admirer of Nelson Mandela, and some of the sentiments of the Mandela era of the country's history towards reconciliation and inclusion may have stuck with him. Speaking about the importance of the private sector during State of the Nation addresses, and also considering his own involvement in business, he is also probably part of the more pro-free market faction in the ANC. However, Ramaphosa must not be misunderstood. He primarily serves a socialist agenda and is one-sided in his understanding of racial issues. His speeches have been quite fundamentalist over the years.
Under the inhuman apartheid system, farm workers bore the brunt of exploitation. White commercial farms were built on the back of slaves and South Africa's indigenous people. Farm workers and labor tenants are still being evicted in a number of places without being afforded alternative accommodation.
Ramaphosa's utterances are often rather vicious in targeting and blaming white South Africans. He tends to oversimplify complex racial issues, like inequality, and simplify it into the narrative of all whites rich versus all blacks poor, or colonizer versus the colonized. He clearly understands racial theory in the context of critical race theory, leaving no room for acknowledging black-on-white racism.
Across the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of kilometers away, the dreaded Dom Pass has resurfaced. In the United States, our black brothers and sisters have embarked on a massive fight to reclaim their dignity. The killing of George Floyd has opened up deep wounds for all of us. But these are the wounds that our brothers and sisters in the United States live with day in, day out, week in and week out, year in and year out. The struggles waged by you, Babu Mlangeni, and the fighters of your generation were foremost in the service of the people of South Africa. But they were also for the cause of liberation of all who suffer under tyranny and oppression. That is why we stand in solidarity with our African American brothers and sisters and express our wish that the American people can reconcile, as we did, and close once and for all the doors of racial injustice.
Ramaphosa does not recognize the existence of white poverty, the racial dimensions of farm attacks, and the devastating impact of post-1994 redress on the lives and careers of thousands of white South Africans. Well, not formally, anyway. This is also not a phenomenon coinciding with the GNU. It has been a trend throughout his re-emergence on the political scene when he was appointed deputy president by Zuma.
It is undeniable that the wealth of this country remains largely in the hands of a predominantly white and male minority.
Does Ramaphosa need the DA in the GNU? Ideologically and mathematically, no. He understands the potential destructive implications of financial markets. Should the DA be replaced by the MKP and EFF? But he will not go out on a limb for the DA to retain the partnership because of it. He does, however, need the DA to shield him in Parliament against the vicious anger of his enemies. That, ironically, is perhaps the single most important consideration that will convince Ramaphosa to fight for retaining the current GNU arrangement.
What is his anger all about, sir?
I wish I could find out. Because every time he talks about Ramaphosa, he talks about that and that and that. Everyone that he worked with, and there was anything that happened, is angry.
To make my next point, it will be important to analyze the assumption that it will be the ANC that will govern South Africa in the foreseeable future, because it will only be the governing party that will have the power to be destructive, or, alternatively, build the country. The ANC got over 12.5 million votes in the 2024 elections, considering both national as well as regional ballots. The DA got just below 7 million. However, the MK received 4.5 million votes, and the EFF just over 3 million. The only party that will practically support the DA's agenda is the Freedom Front Plus. This party received 450,000 votes. These votes translate into 40.8% for the ANC, 21.8% for the DA, 14.58% for the MK, 9.52% for the EFF, and 1.36% for the Freedom Front Plus. Together, the DA and the Freedom Front Plus received just over 23% of the votes. The reality is that a DA-driven political and ideological agenda simply does not have the numbers behind them to prevent a so-called doomsday scenario. Perhaps, for the interim, it may postpone the inevitable, but it will not prevent it. Leftist political groupings in South Africa represented almost 75% of the electorate, and the more moderate alternative only approximately 25%. Ironically, the parties in the GNU represent 73% of the electorate, and parties outside it only 27%. Let's, for the sake of argument, and specifically for the purposes of this video clip, assume that the left of politics, in South Africa, is represented by parties supporting radical racial redress, aggressive land reform, including expropriation without compensation, a social support network funded by the state, and a socialist economic dispensation. The right will be defined in terms of protection of private ownership, holistic development policies for greater equality, as opposed to radical racial redress, emphasis on classical liberal civil rights, and support to social vulnerable groups towards self-sustainability, rather than direct intervention. In terms of trends, there is nothing in the South African election history that indicate a swing towards moderate policies. If election outcomes are analyzed, the trend is towards leftist policies, both in terms of the policies and narratives of new political parties entering the frame since 1994, and then specifically the EFF and MK, as well as in terms of ideological orientations inside existing political formations. In this regard, I specifically refer to the clear signs that the pendulum in the ANC have and are shifting to the left. In my analysis, I have categorized the ideological orientation of the ANC over the elections periods 1995 to 2014 as center-left. It is my opinion that the ANC has always been what it is today, which is basically a leftist political formation driven by socialist and race-based policies. But in 1994, the party was confronted by a mixture of global conditions and moderate leaders. There was the fall of the Berlin Wall and the demise of the Soviet Union. With it, communism, as an ideology, was under enormous pressure. With it, there was a feeling, a political tolerance in South Africa, resulting from Nelson Mandela's active efforts to achieve reconciliation in the country. Add to that the dominance of the Thabo Mbeki, Trevor Manuel combination, which dominated the ANC decision-making for more than a decade. Mbeki was Western-educated and ideologically flexible enough to read and interpret the signs of his time and adapt policy accordingly. In practice, its policy agenda was leftist-central in nature, rather than reflective of its real extreme ideological foundations. However, since 2008, there has been a radicalization in the ANC, initially gradually, but since 2016, rapidly. Partly it has been because of Zuma's corruption and his aggressive response to civil society's resistance to it, but partly it was also because the global dynamics have changed. Capitalism was under pressure after the 2008 economic crisis, and socialist policies gained renewed acceptance and popularity. China's rise and its very real ability to challenge the dominance of the United States, as well as Russia's increased aggression towards the West, woke the dormant resentment about the policy movement to the right in the ANC. This emboldened ideological theorists in the party to pursue its national democratic revolution agenda with increased vigor. Gradually and increasingly rapidly, the party has moved to the left of the political spectrum. Furthermore, breakaways to the left of the party caused considerable anxiety about losing the war for the hearts and minds of the section of the population that represents the majority, which, in turn, could result in the loss of political power, and with it, ill-gained, but more than considerable economic advantages. The shift towards the left has convinced me to reclassify the ANC's ideological and policy position as fundamentalist left. There is just no way that policies such as extremely aggressive affirmative action, black economic empowerment that has entered the terrain of the absurd, land redistribution without compensation, the stripping of the independent decision-making rights of civil society, such as school governing bodies, and a leftist, destructive health policy, such as the NHI, can be regarded as center. It is fundamentalist. The ANC pursues a destructive and discriminatory policy agenda, which will eventually destroy the country. Its policy framework is anything but growth, or development-friendly. The party is all about the national democratic revolution, a vaguely defined concept that essentially implies race-based socialism with strict central control over all and everything, with the exception of the private sector dimensions required to keep the cadre loyal and devoted to the cause. It is useful to understand the strange application of national democratic socialism in the ANC in its proper context. Socialism is popular policy for both historic as well as populist reasons. However, this policy must not tremble on the need for tenderpreneurs and loyal cadres to feet at the trough. Consider recent ANC-led policies: increased BBB, more aggressive employment equity legislation, the NHI, the Bela Act, and various proposals that have, for now, been shelved because of fierce public resistance. All of this legislation will lead to further and more rapidly collapse in South Africa. It must also be kept in mind that the ANC cling for life and death to outdated ideological theories dating back to the 1960s and 70s. For today's realities, its implementation will be disastrous for the country. The ANC is also, in its very nature, anti-Western in orientation. The increasingly aggressive expression of this sentiment holds extreme risks for the South African economy and geopolitical positioning. The ANC is not the good guys suddenly presented by the DA and Freedom Front. The ANC of the pre-2024 election years is still exactly the same ANC, except that it has turned substantially to the left and more race-orientated than ever before. There is nothing in recent trends that show that either the country or the ANC has moved to more moderate policies or ideological orientations. Just the opposite. There is no doubt that the anti-DA sentiments in the ANC are dominant. Not a single person in the ANC top structures with a realistic chance of competing for the ANC leadership in 2027 are in favor of the DA and Freedom Front inclusion in the GNU. It is simply a matter of time before this coalition will collapse. To be clear, my opinion is that the ANC will govern South Africa into the foreseeable future, not necessarily as the unit we see today, but as an ideological idea. It is highly likely, if not sure, for all practical purposes, that the splinter groups from the ANC, namely the EFF and MK, will at some point play a key role in this alliance. This is the dominant ideology in the country, and, in terms of populist support, it is not under threat. Within this context, and from this perspective, I assume that the ANC will govern which then bring into play their destructive policies. Let me just, in conclusion of this section, consider the ANC's choices in respect of a governing partner. The ANC has 40% of the voting power in Parliament. In most policy issues, the party can simply partner with the EFF and MK parties. This is exactly what happened with the Bella and NHI Acts. Even if the EFF and MK do not actively support the ANC, but just withhold their votes, in most legislative proposals, the DA will vote against ANC policy proposals because of the ideological divide, and the ANC will still get their wish. That will probably not even be necessary. If the MK and EFF do not vote against the ANC, they will still have the votes to pass legislation. Here's the issue. The GNU is a theoretical voting bloc in Parliament only. It was used to elect ANC bigwigs to powerful positions. The ANC is not dependent on the DA to stay in and exercise state power. In fact, the collaboration is directly counter to the ideological divides in the country. I hear the argument about protection of the Constitution. But fact of the matter is that the DA and Freedom Front Plus, as well as other parties believing in constitutionalism in such instances, vote with the DA and like-minded parties to protect the Constitution. No formal partnership agreement is needed for that.
International investors are seeing this. They see that there is a seriousness and a commitment, and they like it.
Yeah. I mean, let's focus on the markets for a bit, because that's, I suppose, the most obvious change and the most obvious confidence that we've seen. So we've seen a big recovery in the currency, 5.8%. But can we read too much into that? Because we're also turning the trajectory here. We're seeing interest rates going lower. We're seeing, a bit of a turnaround. Inflation's coming down. The sentiment is so much better. And I think that is that cyclical sentiment that we always look for. Can we attribute that to the GNU and a bit of stability, or is it really other things at play here?
I think a big factor, Leanne, is exactly the fact that there is stability. You know, what economists and investors want to see is stability. They want to see a commitment to the same policy orientation. They don't like surprises. And what they like about this GNU is that there has been no surprises. The fiscal policy, the monetary policy, Treasury, National Treasury remains committed and intact. As you say, they want to bring the debt levels down, the servicing of the debt levels. They want to see growth in the economy. These are all good signs.
I don't think the main issue in South Africa's lack of economic growth is about commitment and stability. I think the main issues are the exclusion of many South Africans, with their skills and creativity, from the economy based on their race. It is socialist economic policies, and it is an inflexible labor market that makes it extremely high risk to invest in the country's economy. This is the thing with South African policymakers and influencers. They argue and talk all around the point, all around all those untouchables. While the untouchables are really the major issues that cause the country to collapse more and more. It's like, if we don't mention it, it's not there, it's not real, and it can therefore not be a cause of the bad things that's happening. In some instances, I am sure that the purist in leftist formations sincerely believe that the so-called transformation policies in the economy are not contributing towards economic stagnation. And, in other instances, they know, but they don't care. The ideology is superseding the reality. An alternate reality has been created in the country, where the proven laws of economics have been rejected in favor of an ideological adaptation thereof. In this reality, targets-based exclusionary racial redress actually leads to stronger economic growth, in spite of the skill gaps it creates and the innovation and wealth it is chasing out of the country. A ridiculously inflexible labor dispensation constitutes no risks to business and investors, where socialism actually attracts capitalist investors and not chasing them away. Much is made of the positive spin-offs of the GNU on the economic front. The following information have been quoted from a document published by Deloitte, titled South Africa Economic Outlook, November 2024. Between the end of February and the end of September 2024, the country's sovereign risk premium improved from 327 to 240 basis points. South Africa's 10-year bond yield dropped to below 10%, its lowest in almost 3 years. The rand appreciated to its strongest level against the US dollar in almost 2 years in September 2024. By the end of October 2024, South Africans celebrated more than 200 successive days, over 2 quarters, of no load shedding, following years of intermittent power outages, and many other structural constraints in sectors such as transport and logistics, which had crippled the economy and limited its potential. The Absa Purchasing Managers Index increased into expansionary territory at 53.3% in September and stayed positive in October, 52.6%, while the Rand Merchant Bank Bureau for Economic Research Business Confidence Index reached its best reading, 38 index points, in almost 2 years in the third quarter of 2024. Year on year, the first 6 months of the year saw the economy expand by 0.5%. Consumer Price Index inflation already dropped to 5.2% year on year in April 2024. Down from 5.6% in February 2024. By August, it dropped lower to 4.4%, which is just below the midpoint of the 3% to 6% inflation target band set by the South African Reserve Bank. A further slowing down of inflation to 3.8% in September and 2.8% in October, the lowest value recorded since June 2020. Was largely due to the strength of the rand, falling fuel prices, and slowing food price inflation. I have just taken some of the points from the report for illustration purposes. The viewer can read the entire report on the website of Deloitte South Africa. I am of the opinion that the seemingly positive trends in the South African economy has to do with positive sentiment, following the enthusiasm in the business sector and among investors about the collaboration between the ANC and the DA. However, in reality, nothing meaningful has changed, and very little actual positive outcomes can be expected. The ANC has not changed its economy policy, and remember, the party is in control of all ministries governing public economic policy, except for small business development, which does not actually regulate economic policy, but must try to create new businesses in spite of destructive policies. Actual economic growth has been disappointing. Much of the initial optimism and positive sentiment resulting from the GNU is fast evaporating.
Because of our history and because of lack of funding for black business, women-owned businesses, we depend as black business for us to grow because of the history of having no funding. We depend on the state to propel us. If you look at the past 8 years, all the black people who actually are doing well financially in terms of being millionaires, billionaires, they have been propelled by the state. And we still strongly believe that the state needs to play a very significant role in propelling small business, black business, women-owned business.
The ideology, the philosophy of the state must provide, the state must enrich previous disadvantaged business people, is closer entrenched in the minds of the government classes in South Africa than even before. In spite of the fact that it has been disastrous over the last 30 years, and in spite of the fact that the justification for it is based on outdated arguments, the relevance of which has long lapsed. For instance, the argument that white business has been successful because they were propelled by the state has lost its relevance the moment that hundreds of schemes were introduced in the country over the last 30 years to support black business to the exclusion of white businesses. The problem is that so much of this money has gone into tenderpreneurs, into a few extremely rich individuals closely connected with the governing elite, and into unbelievably bloated pricing schemes, that there is very little left to make small business work in the country. The point is this: the ANC's economic policy direction is based on false, ideologically driven assumptions, and often on pure racist preference and patterns of inclusion and exclusion. There is not only a conceptual problem with this situation, but fact of the matter is that these policies have failed over the last 30 years to add positive value to the economy. Yet the governing party, that is, the GNU, has doubled down on it. A second point to be made is that neither the DA or the Freedom Front Plus, and not any other of the more moderate parties included in the GNU, will be able to change this situation, to stop preferential economic allocation and redistribution, or an extremely inflexible labor dispensation. I do not support the GNU. I have never supported it. It is futile for South Africans to cling to the government of national unity with the hope that it will be the saving of the country. It will definitely not be. I have 4 arguments to substantiate my resistance to the GNU. Firstly, the ANC is ideologically much more inclined towards the radical left than the capitalist right. It is personal, rather than ideological motivators, that has drifted it towards the DA, rather than the MK and EFF. In the country, holistically speaking, the ideological orientation, as well as current election trends, towards the left, are much stronger than towards the right. More than that, the struggle inside the ANC has actually already been won by forces resistant to the GNU. Secondly, the DA needs the ANC much more than the ANC the DA. The DA has joined the GNU under the mistaken belief that they are special, that the ANC desperately needs them, and that they will actually have a more or less equal say in government affairs. This was never the ANC's intention. The ANC wanted to establish a consensus of parties after they did not achieve an absolute majority in the May 2024 elections. But, and this point is vital, with themselves keeping control and continuing not only their policy framework, but also their patronage networks. Thirdly, the ANC has not all of a sudden become the squeaky cleanness and efficiency of governance excellence. It was as if the DA, Freedom Front Plus, and perhaps other parties as well, went to bed on the 28th of May with a dirty, despicable ANC in mind, only to woke up on the morning of the 29th with a squeaky clean ANC, worthy of protecting at all cost. The ANC is internally corrupt to the core and religiously follows a path towards the so-called National Democratic Revolution that is destroying the country. Fourthly, the forces to the left of the ANC matters, and they matters a lot, in terms of the GNU. Both the MK as well as the EFF, have originated from the ANC. They understand the ANC and the way in which the party is thinking. They are nothing else but more radical extensions of the ANC. They influence the policy direction of the country, not only in terms of setting the tone of the national political debate, but also in terms of the influence they have on influencers inside the ANC. There is a perception that the financial markets will severely punish the country if the DA is not included in government. To some extent, this may be true. However, the question is, how sustainable is this as a motivator to keep the party in the GNU, considering the enormous resistance the ANC is getting from the left? I don't think it has that much convincing influence. The ANC is inherently and ideologically hostile to capitalist financial markets. The party is equally hostile and aggressive towards Western countries, which are the primary ones demanding the inclusion of the DA in the GNU. The question must also be asked, how much real, tangible value has the GNU actually contribute to the economic welfare of the country to date? There seems to be positive indicators, but economic growth remains very weak. It really doesn't seem that the DA or Freedom Front Plus have any moderating impact on policies of the ANC, and neither have any of these parties contributing meaningfully to development in the country. And that then is my opinion on the GNU. Thank you for watching this video. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe. For more value-adding resources about the topic, visit my website at www.francminner.com.